The planet was a harsh place, scarred by endless battles and burned cities. Smoke rose from broken buildings and the air smelled of dust and metal. Explosions echoed in the distance, and people ran for cover whenever they heard the distant thrum of weapons. Amid all this chaos, humans and the alien species called Varelians had been fighting for years, each side believing the other was dangerous and untrustworthy. Fear and anger had become normal on this planet, and kindness was almost impossible to find. Ethan, a young human soldier, was part of a team assigned to rescue civilians trapped in the war zones. He had grown up in a world where fighting was unavoidable, but he had always believed in helping others whenever he could. Today he moved cautiously through the ruins of a collapsed marketplace. The ground was uneven, covered with rubble and broken metal. Smoke and dust made it hard to see, and the sound of distant fighting kept his heart racing. Every step could lead to danger, yet he pressed on, knowing lives depended on him. As he rounded a corner, a faint sound reached his ears. It was a soft whimper, almost drowned out by the chaos of war. Ethan froze and listened carefully. There it was again, a small, frightened sound of someone in pain. He followed it, moving slowly to avoid attracting attention. Behind a pile of shattered concrete, he found the source, a small Varelian child trapped under a fallen beam. The child's skin shimmered slightly in the dim light, a unique feature of the alien species, and their large, bright eyes looked at Ethan with fear. Despite the years of conflict, Ethan felt no hesitation. He knew this child was technically the enemy. The Varelians had caused destruction to human settlements, and many humans had lost friends and family in their attacks. Yet here was an innocent life in need of help. Ethan took a deep breath and carefully lifted the heavy beam, ignoring the risk to himself. The child cried out, partly in fear and partly in relief, but Ethan gently reassured them. "It's okay. I'm here. You'll be safe now." The words felt strange to say to a member of the enemy species, but he meant them completely. Ethan's own team appeared behind him, moving quickly through the rubble. They had seen him lifting the beam and helping the child. One of his comrades, a stern soldier named Harris, frowned. "Ethan, what are you doing? That's a Varelian. You're risking your life for the enemy." Ethan didn't turn to argue. He held the child close and made sure they were free from danger. "This is just a child," he said softly. "They haven't done anything to us. We can't ignore someone who needs help." His words hung in the smoky air, carrying more meaning than just the act of saving the child. It was a reminder that compassion could exist even in a world filled with violence. As they moved through the ruins, Ethan noticed other humans watching him, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. No one expected a human to protect a Varelian child. It went against everything they had been taught about enemies and allies. Yet, Ethan didn't care about judgment. He focused on the child's safety, guiding them through the dangerous streets, toward a safer area. From a distance, hidden on a nearby hill, several Varelian soldiers observed the scene. They had been on patrol, searching for any humans who might try to interfere with their operations. When they saw a human lifting one of their young, they were stunned. Some felt anger rising, while others were quietly impressed. None of them had expected such an act, and it made them question what they thought they knew about humans. The child's bright eyes and small hands clinging to Ethan seemed to soften even the hardest soldiers for a brief moment. Ethan continued through the wreckage, alert for any sudden attacks. He knew that any moment could bring danger, yet he felt a strange sense of calm. The child began to mimic some of his movements, slowly gaining trust. They reached a partially destroyed building that offered some cover, and Ethan crouched down to give the child a moment to rest. He removed some dust and debris from their clothes and spoke gently. "We're almost safe. Just a little further and you'll be away from all this fighting." Despite the fear in their eyes, the child seemed to understand. They held on to him, leaning slightly for support. For a moment, the world felt quieter. The chaos and explosions in the distance didn't matter as much. Ethan realized that this small act of helping someone, even someone from the enemy side, could create a connection stronger than fear or anger. It was a rare, quiet moment in a world filled with war. His team stayed nearby, watching but not interfering. Some whispered among themselves, unsure if Ethan's actions were brave or foolish. Harris shook his head but didn't try to stop him. They all knew that saving a child could have consequences, but they also recognized that humanity sometimes meant doing what was right, no matter the risks. As they continued their journey, Ethan kept looking ahead, alert to danger, but also aware of the bond forming between him and the child. Every time the child looked at him with wide, trusting eyes, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was no longer just about survival or duty. It was about protecting a life that depended entirely on him, even if it meant putting himself at risk. From the shadows, the Varelians observed silently. Queen Lyra, the child's mother, was far away but would soon hear of the human who had saved her young. Among her soldiers, speculation and curiosity spread. Who was this human? And why would he risk himself for one of them? The idea of a human acting with such courage and compassion for a Varelian child was almost unimaginable. Ethan didn't know that his actions were being watched by someone powerful. He didn't think about rewards or recognition. All that mattered was the child in front of him and the safety he could provide. Step by step, he guided the child toward a safer area, navigating through rubble, smoke, and danger. Each step was careful, deliberate, but filled with determination. By the time they reached a temporary safe zone where other humans and refugees were gathering, Ethan's body was tired, and his clothes were dusty and torn. Yet the child remained, unharmed. And that was what mattered most. They clung to him tightly, almost as if they could sense that he was the only one who truly cared. As the sun set over the war-torn city, Ethan realized something important. In a world defined by conflict, fear, and hatred, a single act of compassion could create a ripple of hope. Saving one life, even an enemy's, was a choice that mattered more than any strategy, plan, or weapon. And though he did not yet know this small act would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life, and the life of the Varelian child, forever. After reaching the temporary safe zone, Ethan thought he could finally rest. The child was now away from immediate danger, and other humans were helping to provide food and shelter. But the quiet relief was short-lived. Reports came in that Varelian patrols were still nearby, searching for any humans who might interfere with their operations, and anyone who might have harmed or taken one of their young. Ethan knew that staying in one place for too long would put both him and the child at risk. Despite exhaustion, Ethan made a decision. He could not leave the child alone, not even for a moment. He gathered supplies, a few rations, water, and some basic medical items, and prepared to move again. The child, still wary but beginning to trust him more, followed closely. Every step they took was cautious. Ethan kept a constant watch, listening to the sounds of the ruined city around them. Distant explosions still shook the ground, and the wind carried dust that stung their eyes. The danger had not gone away. As they moved through narrow streets and broken buildings, Ethan began to notice signs that Varelian soldiers were closing in. Strange, faint movements in the distance, shadows that didn't belong to the ruins, and occasional flashes of light from alien weapons all reminded him that time was running out. He knew they had to reach a safer place before the patrols arrived. The child sensed the tension too, clutching his hand tightly and looking to him for guidance. Suddenly, a group of Varelian soldiers appeared, their armor glinting in the sunlight. They had spotted Ethan and the child. Without hesitation, they opened fire. Ethan immediately threw himself over the child, taking the first blows to his body. The child screamed, but Ethan's hands covered them, shielding them from the worst of the attacks. Pain shot through his arms and legs, but he forced himself to stay focused. Every movement, every decision mattered. One wrong step could cost both of them their lives. Using debris and fallen walls for cover, Ethan moved the child along, dragging them behind him when necessary. Bullets and energy blasts whizzed past, some hitting walls and some narrowly missing him. His heart pounded, but he did not panic. Each moment was a test of skill, courage, and endurance. He had trained for dangerous missions before, but this was different. This was personal. He was protecting a life that depended entirely on him, and he could not fail. At one point, A blast struck close enough to throw them both to the ground. Dust and rubble filled the air. Ethan's body ached, cuts and bruises covering him, but he pushed himself up. He wiped the dust from the child's face and whispered, "We're going to be okay. Stay with me. Don't be afraid." The child nodded weakly, gripping his arm as tightly as they could. Despite the fear, there was a flicker of trust forming between them, a fragile connection that grew stronger with every risk Ethan took. The Varelian soldiers pursued them relentlessly, but Ethan's knowledge of the terrain gave him an advantage. He led the child through alleyways, across crumbling bridges, and into abandoned buildings where the patrols were less likely to follow. At one point, they came to a partially collapsed street where the only exit was over a pile of jagged rubble. Ethan went first, testing each step carefully, then guided the child across. A single misstep could have been disastrous, but he moved with steady determination, knowing the child's life was in his hands. As they reached a temporary shelter, in a ruined district, Ethan finally had a moment to catch his breath. He checked the child for injuries. Thankfully, they had escaped major harm, though they were shaken and exhausted. He offered a small ration of water and some food, which the child accepted hesitantly. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, words were unnecessary. Both understood that they were in this together, and that each had become responsible for the other in ways neither had anticipated. But peace was fleeting. The sound of Varelian patrols grew louder again. Ethan realized they had little time to rest. They needed a plan to evade pursuit and find a truly safe location. He scanned the map he had carried with him, thinking through possible routes and places where they could hide. Every choice was a gamble, but he knew that inaction was far more dangerous. "We have to keep moving," he told the child. "There's a place where you'll be safe. I promise." As night fell, Ethan and the child moved under the cover of darkness. The shadows concealed them from patrolling soldiers, and the cooler air made the journey slightly easier. He kept the child close, sometimes carrying them when the path became too difficult. Despite the exhaustion, there was a quiet sense of purpose. Each step brought them closer to safety, and each moment of danger strengthened the bond between them. The child began to follow his instructions more confidently, trusting his judgment even in the darkest moments. During one particularly tense moment, a Varelian scout appeared just a few meters away. Ethan froze, calculating his options. With a quick hand motion, he signaled the child to stay down, covering them with his own body once more as the scout passed without noticing them. The child clung to him, eyes wide, but trusting. Ethan whispered, softly, "See, we can do this. Stay calm and follow me." It was a small victory, but in a world of constant danger, small victories were priceless. By the time they reached a more secure area, an abandoned outpost far from the main conflict, Ethan allowed himself to sit down and rest for a few minutes. His body ached from the injuries he had taken while shielding the child. Cuts and bruises marked him as a reminder of the risks he had faced, but he felt no regret. Saving the child had been worth every pain, every scar, and every sleepless hour. He looked at the child, who was slowly recovering their courage, and felt a deep sense of responsibility. This was no longer just a mission. It was a bond forged in fire, fear, and compassion. Ethan also knew that the story of his actions might reach the Varelian mother, Queen Lyra. Though he did not fear her wrath, he understood that she was powerful, intelligent, and protective of her child. How she would react was unknown, and it added another layer of tension to their journey. But for now, his focus remained on keeping the child safe and moving forward, one careful step at a time. As dawn approached, Ethan allowed a small smile. The child was still alive, still with him, and together they had survived the night. In a world filled with war, destruction, and distrust, they had found a fragile connection that transcended species and conflict. Ethan had taken the blows, shielded the child, and risked everything, but he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. What lay ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and full of challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Hope that one life, protected with courage and compassion, could spark something greater than fear and hatred. After the long and dangerous journey, Ethan finally found a place where he and the Varelian child could rest safely. It was an abandoned settlement on the outskirts of the city, far from the front lines where the fighting was heaviest. Broken, buildings surrounded them, but at least the walls provided some protection from the wind and from prying eyes. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself a moment to breathe and to check both his own injuries and the child's. The child had begun to relax slightly, though fear still lingered in their eyes. They were small and fragile, but they had endured more than most humans could imagine. Ethan gave them some water and a few rations, which the child accepted slowly, almost cautiously. He spoke softly. "You're safe here for now. We just need to rest and get our strength back." The child nodded, but instead of speaking, they simply curled up near him, trusting him enough to let their guard down just a little. Ethan looked around the settlement, scanning for signs of danger. Broken windows, crumbling walls, and scattered debris were all that remained of the once thriving area, yet it offered a temporary refuge. He knew they could not stay for long, but this short pause was necessary. His body was sore, bruised, and still recovering from the blows he had taken to protect the child. Every movement reminded him of the risks he had faced, yet he had no regrets. The child's life was more important than his own comfort or pain. While Ethan tended to his wounds, he tried to understand more about the child. He observed small details: the way their skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, the unusual shape of their eyes, the slight way they moved when frightened. All of these were signs that they were not human. Yet Ethan felt a connection growing stronger with each passing moment. It was strange to feel so responsible for someone from a species that had been considered an enemy. Yet it also felt natural. Compassion, he realized, did not need boundaries. During the quiet hours, Ethan began to think about the Varelian mother, Queen Lyra. He had heard stories from his team about her, powerful, intelligent, and fiercely protective of her child. Some humans whispered that she was ruthless, punishing anyone who dared to harm her young. Ethan's thoughts were conflicted. Would she see him as a threat, or would she understand that he had risked his life to save her child? He had no way of knowing, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on him. As the day passed, the child slowly began to open up. Small gestures of trust emerged, a hand resting on his arm, a quiet glance, a faint smile when he spoke. Ethan responded with patience and kindness, recognizing that building trust was just as important as keeping the child physically safe. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you." The child seemed to understand, though their language was still foreign to him. Over time, gestures and expressions bridged the gap, forming a silent communication that was just as strong as words. The human team continued to provide support from a distance, ensuring that Ethan and the child had basic necessities. However, they respected his decision to stay with the child at all times. Some questioned his judgment, wondering why he risked so much for a member of the enemy species. But Ethan remained firm. "This is about life, not sides," he would say. His conviction inspired a quiet respect even among the skeptical team members. Meanwhile, rumors of Ethan's actions began to spread. Varelian scouts had noticed that one of their young had been saved by a human, and whispers of this bravery reached Queen Lyra. The child, who had started to trust Ethan, likely shared small gestures and behaviors that signaled the human's protective nature. Though far away, the Queen's attention was piqued. She had always believed humans to be dangerous, selfish, and untrustworthy. Yet this one had risked himself without expectation of reward. The idea unsettled her, and curiosity began to grow alongside caution. During this time, Ethan also used the opportunity to learn more about the child's background. Though communication was limited, he observed habits, expressions, and small items the child carried. A small trinket, worn but clearly cherished, hinted at the child's family and home. These observations allowed Ethan to understand not just the immediate needs of the child, but also their emotional world. He realized that protecting the child was not just about physical safety. It was about providing comfort, reassurance, and trust in a world that had taught them fear. As evening fell, the settlement grew quiet. The sounds of distant battles faded slightly and the air became cooler. Ethan and the child sat together in the shelter, sharing what little food they had. The child's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer just protector and protected. They were companions in a dangerous world, bound together by survival and compassion. Ethan's thoughts drifted again to Queen Lyra. He knew that sooner or later, she would arrive. He didn't know if she would come as an enemy, seeking revenge, or as a mother, seeking to reclaim her child. The uncertainty was daunting, but he resolved to remain calm. Whatever happened, he would not abandon the child. His role had grown beyond that of a soldier. He had become a guardian, responsible for a life that could not survive without him. That night, as he watched over the child sleeping peacefully beside him, Ethan felt the weight of his choices. Each step, each risk, and each moment of courage had led to this fragile but vital connection. He knew the path ahead would be even more difficult, but he also understood that compassion had power. It could cross barriers, bridge differences, and create bonds that neither fear nor hatred could break. Outside, the first rays of dawn began to touch the horizon, signaling another day filled with challenges and danger. Ethan rose quietly, checking the child for injuries and preparing for the journey ahead. Though the future remained uncertain, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. They had survived the first trials together, and that survival had forged trust, courage, and hope. Ethan took one last look around the shelter before stepping into the morning light. The city beyond was still dangerous, still scarred by war, but he no longer felt entirely alone. The child, who had once been terrified and alone, now looked to him with trust and reliance, and somewhere far away, Queen Lyra would soon learn of the human who had protected her young, a human who had risked everything out of compassion rather than fear. In that quiet moment, Ethan realized something profound. War could destroy cities, lives, and families, but a single act of courage and kindness could shine through the darkness. He had taken the first steps toward something larger than survival. He had begun to build a bridge between two worlds, one small life at a time. Ethan had known from the beginning that this moment would come, though he hadn't expected it to arrive so quickly. As he and the child settled into a safer location farther from the fighting, the air suddenly grew tense. Shadows shifted along the edges of the ruined city, and a quiet hum of energy filled the atmosphere. Ethan's instincts told him that someone powerful had arrived. Then she appeared. Queen Lyra, the Varelian mother, stepped into the open with an aura of command that made everyone, even seasoned soldiers, pause. Her presence was unlike anything Ethan had ever faced. Tall and imposing, she moved with grace, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and filled with curiosity, fixed on him immediately. Every step she took radiated authority, and yet there was a hint of something softer beneath her stern exterior. She had come for her child, and she would not be ignored. The child, startled but not panicked, clung to Ethan instinctively. Ethan placed a protective hand on their shoulder, standing tall despite his injuries. He met Queen Lyra's gaze calmly, knowing that any sign of fear might be misinterpreted. "I'm not here to harm your child," he said in a steady voice. "I've only tried to keep them safe." Queen Lyra studied him silently, her eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing the truth of his words. Around them, the other Varelians and human allies watched carefully, waiting for a sign of how she would react. Ethan felt the weight of the moment. He had protected this child at great personal cost, and now the queen would decide if that act of courage would be respected or punished. "You risked your life for my young," Queen Lyra said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "Tell me why a human would do such a thing for a Varelian." Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because they're a child. Because no one should be hurt when they don't deserve it. That's all. I didn't think about sides or enemies. I just wanted to protect them." The queen's eyes softened slightly as she observed the child's trust in Ethan. The little one's small hands clung to his arm, and their eyes, wide with admiration and relief, seemed to speak more than words ever could. Queen Lyra took a step closer, measuring him, watching the care and patience in his actions. "This is unusual," she murmured, almost to herself. "Humans are not known for this kind of honor. Yet here you are, risking everything for someone who is technically your enemy." She studied Ethan closely, her gaze sharp but thoughtful. "Do you understand what you have done? You could have been killed. You could have made this child a target. And yet, you chose to protect them. Why?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because it was the right thing to do. That's all I needed to know." Queen Lyra's expression shifted, a mix of caution and respect. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to the child. Her eyes softened as she studied them, noting the trust and safety they now felt beside Ethan. "I see now," she said quietly. "You did not act out of fear or obligation. You acted out of care. That is rare." The tension in the air slowly began to ease. The soldiers, both human and Varelian, watched in silence as the Queen continued to observe Ethan. He remained steadfast, showing no sign of weakness or fear, only patience and protective intent. The child reached up, placing a small hand on Ethan's shoulder as if to silently affirm his courage. After a long moment, Queen Lyra finally spoke decisively. "This human will not be punished. On the contrary, they have earned my respect, and for that they shall be recognized as a guardian of my child." Her words hung in the air, surprising everyone present. Ethan blinked, trying to process the honor being bestowed upon him. The Queen extended a hand, not in threat but in acknowledgement. "From this day forward, you are not only protector but also trusted companion. My child will not leave your care side, nor will you face reprisal from my people." Ethan felt a mix of relief and humility. "I thank you," he said simply. "I will continue to protect them no matter what." The Queen nodded, satisfied. She had tested him, and in the end, she recognized the value of compassion and courage. The child, safe and comforted, looked up at Ethan with gratitude and trust, their small hand still holding his. For the first time since the journey began, Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not from battle but from an act of selfless care. The Queen turned slightly, signaling her guards to stand down. Ethan realized that this moment marked the beginning of a new relationship between humans and Varelians, built not on conflict but on trust, honor, and respect. Though the path ahead would still be challenging, this fragile peace offered hope for a future where understanding could exist across worlds. As the sun began to rise over the ruined city, Ethan, the child, and Queen Lyra stood together, forming an unlikely alliance born of courage and compassion. The journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Through this act of protection, bonds had been forged that neither war nor fear could easily break. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself adjusting to a new reality. He was no longer just a soldier on a mission. He had become a guardian and a trusted companion to the Varelian child. Life in the temporary settlement settled into a careful routine. The child learned to trust him more each day, following his guidance and observing his cautious yet confident movements. Queen Lyra remained nearby, her presence a quiet reassurance to the child, and a reminder to Ethan of the responsibility he now carried. She did not interfere with daily routines, but her attention was always present. Her eyes would often meet his, not with suspicion this time, but with acknowledgement of the courage he had shown. It was a recognition that few humans ever received from her kind, and it was deeply meaningful. The child began to explore more, gaining confidence under Ethan's watchful eye. Small smiles and gestures of affection became more frequent. Ethan realized that protecting someone went beyond keeping them physically safe. It meant teaching them trust, providing comfort, and showing patience when fear lingered. Each day brought new challenges but also small victories that strengthened the bond between them. Word of Ethan's courage and dedication spread among both human and Varelian communities. Stories circulated of a human who had taken the blows, risked life and limb, and shielded an alien child with unwavering commitment. Some were skeptical, Others were inspired, but all agreed on one point. His actions were extraordinary. Through one small act of kindness, he had begun to change perceptions on both sides. Queen Lyra gradually allowed herself to speak more openly with Ethan. They discussed the child's needs, safety, and future. She acknowledged that his compassion had exceeded her expectations and had challenged her assumptions about humans. Their conversations were careful, respectful, and full of mutual curiosity. Each exchange built understanding, and the Queen began to see that cooperation could be stronger than conflict. One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow over the settlement, the child ran toward Ethan, laughing for the first time since the chaos had begun. Ethan knelt to their level, smiling back. It was a simple moment, yet it carried immense weight. It symbolized survival, trust, and the beginnings of hope. The bond that had formed in the midst of danger now blossomed into something deeper, something that neither species could have anticipated. Ethan also realized that his role had changed the larger picture. By protecting the child, he had set an example for others, humans and Varelians alike. Courage and compassion could exist even in times of war. They could bridge differences, create trust, and inspire others to act beyond fear and prejudice. He understood that his actions were no longer just about survival. They were about hope, understanding, and the potential for unity. Queen Lyra watched these developments quietly. She saw the child thriving, trusting, and laughing under Ethan's care. She saw humans and Varelians learning to cooperate, if only in small ways. She understood that this human had not only saved her child, but had also helped create the possibility of a better future for both species. For her, it was a profound lesson. Honor, courage, and compassion could come from unexpected places. Months passed, and the bond between Ethan, the child, and Queen Lyra grew stronger. The once hostile environment slowly began to feel safer. The child's laughter echoed through the settlement, bridging gaps that had once seemed unbridgeable. Ethan had taken the blows, endured pain, and faced danger without hesitation. But in return, he had earned trust, respect, and a unique place in a story that transcended conflict. In the end, Ethan realized that true heroism was not measured by victories in battle but by the lives one chose to protect, the courage shown in the face of danger, and the compassion offered to those in need. Through his actions, he had created a bond that would last far beyond the conflicts of the present, a bond that symbolized hope, understanding, and the enduring power of humanity to rise above fear. As the sun set on the settlement, Ethan stood, with the child beside him, Queen Lyra watching from a distance. Together they faced a future that was uncertain, yet full of promise. The journey had been dangerous, the challenges great, but one truth remained. Compassion, courage, and honor could change the world, one life at a time. And in that truth, all three of them found strength, trust, and a quiet hope for a better tomorrow.